The darkest chapter of the British RAF in World War II, the Lübeck Bay tragedy. Picture this, it's May 1945, and World War II is in its final act. Nazi Germany is crumbling, the Allies are closing in, and victory is just around the corner. But in the midst of this hope, a horrific event unfolds in Lübeck Bay, Germany, that leaves a stain on history. On May 3, 1945, British Royal Air Force planes bombed 3 ships loaded with over 10,000 concentration camp prisoners. These weren't enemy warships, they were vessels under the Red Cross banner, meant to carry survivors to safety. What happened? Was it a tragic mistake, a deliberate act, or something in between? Let's dive into this story, unpack the facts, and explore what it means for us today, as Americans reflecting on a war that shaped the world. The setup: ships turned into floating prisons by spring 1945. Nazi Germany was on its last legs. The Third Reich's leaders were desperate to cover their tracks, and one of their grim plans involved 3 ships, the luxury liner Cap Arcona, and 2 cargo vessels, Deutschland and Lübeck. These weren't your typical wartime ships. The Nazis had turned them into floating prisons, cramming them with over 10,000 prisoners from concentration camps, mostly Jews and Eastern Europeans. Officially, these prisoners were supposed to be handed over to the Swedish Red Cross, a neutral organization that had already rescued 15,000 people through its White Buses operation, saving folks from Norway, Denmark, France, and Poland. But here's where it gets chilling. Declassified documents later revealed the Nazis had no intention of letting these prisoners go free. The ships were a death trap. Lifeboats and rescue gear removed. Crews slashed to a skeleton staff. The ship captains were under SS guard, forced to comply under threat of execution. The plan, according to a high-ranking SS officer, was to sink the ships at sea, ensuring the prisoners, whom the Nazis deemed undesirable, would never see freedom. It's a plot straight out of a nightmare, and it sets the stage for what happened next. The attack, a devastating strike on May 3, 1945. At around 2:45 p.m., the skies over Lübeck Bay roared with the sound of British RAF Hawker Typhoon fighter bombers, loaded with cannons, rockets, and bombs. The ships below were marked with white flags and Red Cross symbols, signaling their humanitarian mission. But the planes didn't hold back. The first wave hammered the Cap Arcona, setting it ablaze. The second wave targeted the Deutschland and Lübeck. The Lübeck sank in minutes. Out of 2,800 souls on board, only 123 survived. Prisoners were trapped in the holds, locked behind heavy doors as the ship went down. Those who escaped the flames faced the icy waters of the Baltic Sea. The Cap Arcona and Deutschland weren't spared either. Fires raged, and Nazi guards blocked prisoners from escaping. Over 4,000 people burned alive or choked on toxic smoke. The Cap Arcona capsized, partially sinking, while the Deutschland lingered for hours before going under. Survivors who made it to the water were gunned down by British planes and, according to some accounts, even torpedo boats. German trawlers rescued most of the Nazi guards, but the prisoners? They were left to drown or freeze. For weeks afterward, bodies washed up on the shores, a grim reminder of the carnage. A survivor's voice: Vasily Solomatkin, a Soviet prisoner of war who lived through this hell, wrote about the horror. British planes bombed and strafed the ships, ignoring the white flags of surrender. Those who swam for shore were shot at by torpedo boats. And the few who made it to land, they were rounded up into British camps, their suffering far from over. His words paint a vivid picture of desperation and betrayal. Survivors spoke of screams, fire, and the sheer hopelessness of trying to escape under a hail of bullets. For these prisoners, who'd already endured years of Nazi cruelty, this was a final, crushing blow. Who's to blame? Digging into the why, at first glance, you might think this was a tragic mix-up. War is chaotic, right? But here's the kicker. Declassified British documents show the RAF knew the ships were carrying concentration camp prisoners. Yet the order to attack came anyway. When pressed, British officials later claimed they thought high-ranking Nazis might be sneaking out of Germany on those ships, headed for neutral Sweden. But that excuse feels flimsy. Why ignore the Red Cross markings? Why the relentless assault on defenseless survivors in the water? On the flip side, the Nazis were no innocents. Georg Henning von Bassewitz-Baer, the SS chief in Hamburg, admitted during post-war interrogations that the plan was to drown the prisoners at sea. He chillingly noted that the ships were loaded with mostly Jews and Slavs, as if their lives were disposable. The British tribunal let him walk, but the Soviet Union didn't. He was sentenced to 25 years of hard labor or his role in murdering 45,000 civilians elsewhere. He died 2 years later. So, who's the real villain here? The Nazis, with their genocidal plot? The British, who bombed despite knowing the truth? Or is it just the fog of war, where everyone's hands get dirty? As Americans, we often see World War II as a clear fight of good versus evil, but this story challenges that narrative. It's a reminder that even the good guys can make choices that leave thousands dead. The bigger picture, economics and politics of 1945. To understand why this happened, let's zoom out. By 1945, Europe was a mess. Germany's economy was in shambles. Its GDP had tanked by 20% since before the war, per economic historians. Factories were bombed out, and ports like Lübeck were less about trade and more about military desperation. Britain wasn't in great shape either. The war cost the UK a quarter of its wealth, and they owed the US billions in Lend-Lease debt, about $50 billion in today's dollars. The pressure to end the war fast was immense, and that might explain why the RAF acted so recklessly. Then there's Sweden, the neutral player in this drama. The Swedish Red Cross was doing heroic work, saving thousands through the White Buses program. But Sweden's neutrality came with baggage. They'd been selling iron ore to Nazi Germany, keeping their economy humming while others bled. This made some allies skeptical of Sweden's motives, which might explain why the Red Cross flags didn't stop the attack. In war, trust is hard to come by. Why this matters to Americans today? As Americans, we often view World War II through the lens of our triumphs: D-Day, the Pacific Campaign, the liberation of Europe. But stories like Lübeck Bay remind us that war is messy, and even the Allies made choices that cost innocent lives. This tragedy raises tough questions. How do we balance military necessity with humanity? What happens when good intentions lead to catastrophic outcomes? And how do we ensure history doesn't repeat itself? Today, the US remains a global leader, often stepping into conflicts to protect freedom or stop tyranny. But this story is a cautionary tale. It's a call to think critically about the decisions our leaders make in times of crisis. Whether it's drone strikes, sanctions, or military interventions, the line between right and wrong can blur fast. As citizens, we have a duty to ask questions, hold power accountable, and demand transparency, just like the declassified documents that expose the truth about Lübeck Bay. This story hits hard because it's not just about number 7,000 to 9,000 dead. Historians still argue over the count. It's about people, mothers, fathers, children, who survived the horrors of concentration camps only to die in flames or freezing water, betrayed by both their captors and their would-be liberators. The irony is brutal. The British attack might have saved some prisoners from the Nazis' plan to sink the ships, but at what cost? As an American, I can't help but feel a mix of anger and sadness. Anger at the Nazis for their cruelty, at the British for their recklessness, and at the war itself for turning humans into pawns. Sadness for the lives lost, for the survivors who carried this trauma, and for the fact that we're still grappling with the echoes of these choices today. This isn't just history, it's a warning about what happens when we lose sight of our humanity. Let's keep this conversation going. Subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history's untold stories. Drop a comment below. What do you think about the Lübeck Bay tragedy? Was it a war crime, a mistake, or something else? Share this story with your friends and family, because these are the kinds of stories that shape how we see the world. Let's honor the victims by learning from the past and working for a better future.